what if we reached out to a kid who felt like they were less than something because they had same gender attraction, or they had some kind of addiction, or they were tricked into sending nude photos? What if they just knew that no matter what they did, they would be safe with their family or their parents? Nobody's story is finished, no matter what they've done. And if we could love others like that, we would give so much more grace and have so much more healing.
Today's conversation is one that I know will stay with you. My guest today is my sister, Cathy Ambrose, a wife, mother, nonprofit leader, and a tireless advocate for suicide prevention and mental health. Cathy shares her own journey through anxiety and depression, what she's learned about parenting with grace, and how covenant joy can be found in the messy middle of life. And before we dive in, I want to remind you about the Divine Worth Summit. This is a powerful gathering of women sharing messages of identity, hope, and faith in Jesus Christ. I'll be participating, and I'd love for you to join me there. You can find all the details through the link in the show notes. Hello, welcome to New and Everlasting, the podcast finding covenant joy in everyday living. I am your host, Amy Beck, and I am beyond excited for my guest today, Cathy Ambrose. I'm going to read the introduction she submitted to me because I found it just delightful. Cathy is very hesitant on writing her introduction because Amy can call her out. Cathy loves her baby sis, Amy, and remembers the announcement over the yellow kitchen wall phone with the 30-foot cord that it was a girl as one of the happiest moments of her 10 years of life. Cathy grew up too soon and left Missouri to attend BYU, leaving her 8-year-old Amy behind. Cathy thought she would easily get the hang of adulting, but is realizing she has a long way to go. Through all her ups and downs, she has always held on to Jesus, knowing he is the best friend she can have and her best bet. Cathy met Rick, her husband of 32 years at BYU. He gave her a rock and is her rock. Cathy has 3 adult children, all are in college, 2 on the autism spectrum, 1 boy, 1 married, and 1 living in Michigan. Cathy is a part-time student finishing up what she started at BYU 36 years ago. The executive director of Hope for Orem, a nonprofit 501c3 that promotes suicide awareness by providing local grants to public schools and local suicide prevention initiatives, scholarships, and holding community outreach events. She's currently serving as the club president for the Orem Linden Rotary Club, which is celebrating 50 years of service this year. So remarkable and well-written. Brava.
Did we point out that we're wearing matching shirts?
Oh, yes, I was going to point that out. We did not plan this, but Cathy in her olive and me in my navy are twinning it, and that was absolutely not planned.
It's a sister thing. Yeah.
It's a sister thing. I know you had a big event on Monday. Was that Hope for Orem?
Yes, that was Hope for Orem's annual mental wellness fair, where we bring in a keynote who will speak either a personal or professional experience of suicide prevention. And then we get about 20, they're not really vendors because I don't let them sell during my event, but service providers, organizations that are invested in mental wellness too. And so it's kind of a one-stop shop experience. And we also bring in face painters and balloon artists and snow cone machine guy, and Cosmo was there, and we had Beauty and the Beast. We wanted to make talking about mental health a safe place and a fun place. So we make it a family fun event, and everything's free. And I'm really grateful that I have a sponsor who can fund all this wonderful stuff. So I think it's our 6th year.
That is remarkable and such a valuable asset to your community.
Yes, thank you. It's really hard to get feedback on how successful something is, but I usually, and this is the tender mercy, I get at least one person saying, so and so, or I, or my family, we were looking for resources and we found them tonight, so they can take action. And to me, that's worth the whole, 9 months of planning.
I say all the blood, sweat, tears. It's such a lonely place to be. If you're struggling with it, a loved one is struggling with it.
Right. Where do you turn? And where do you feel safe?
How did you get involved with Hope for Orem?
The president and founder of Hope for Orem, her name is Janice Lindley, and she went back to school when her youngest child started school. So she went back to finish her degree, and it was in public health, and she had to do an internship. So she interned with Hope for Utah, which is not the same as Hope for Orem, but we work together a lot. But they have the curriculum that does the Hope Squads in a lot of the schools. And she asked them at the end of her internship, what do they need the most help with? And they told her a few things, and she says, I can do that. I can help that way. So she started Hope for Orem and held a big event at the local high school. It invited news media and mental health professionals and all these people to come to talk about the problem of suicide in Utah County, which has had a significant problem. And afterwards, they did a Q&A, and they had somebody representing LGBTQ, they had somebody representing this and that and the other. And during the Q&A, I raised my hand and I said, what about kids on the autism spectrum? They're at a higher risk than their peers, and the warning signs are their normal. And she said, I don't know. This is on the mic on the stage. She says, I don't know. You should be our autism representative. Come on down. And I was like, um, peer pressure. So I went down to the stage and met Janice Lindley, and then she started another charity called Bridle Up Hope in Mapleton. She did a franchise from the one in Alpine. And she said, I'm too busy to run this. I think you could run it. Would you run it? And I said, absolutely. So that's what I've been doing, and it's been a blessing. And I know my whole life I've been preparing for this role, because I was PTA president 3 times, council president once, and I'm like, oh, I know how to work. I know how to work and organize and do things and not make money from it. I'm really good at that. So,
That got me to thinking. You just had your big annual event, but what if people want help or information or resources right now? Where would you direct them?
I would probably send them to the website Hope number 4 Utah, the number 4 Hope for Utah, and they have a resource page and they have lists of places you can turn to.
Outside of the state of Utah, what resources are you familiar with?
There's NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Health. There is AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. There's a lot of resources out there. There's people just never need them until something really bad happens and then they don't know where to go. Some people go to religious leaders, which is fine for my faith. All the bishops are lay bishops, but not all of them have mental health training. So that one's kind of hard. I know most pastors do. That's part of becoming a pastor. So that sometimes backfires. I'm not saying you can't go to your religious leader for mental health, but I would be cautious about solely going to a bishop for mental health, because there are other people who have degrees and have a bigger umbrella of experience in treating that. Yeah, and the number one thing I would do is just talk to somebody. Sometimes that's all people need, is to be heard. Start there and see what doors open for you.
I'll put the links to those resources in the show notes for listeners to have an easy reference to with bouts of depression or chronic depression. When you answered the questionnaire I sent out, you mentioned the problem of shame.
A lot of people will come to me and say, what causes suicide? Especially, I'm in Utah County, and they want to pick one bad guy, and it's always so multifaceted. It's never one cause. But one of the biggest problems I think our youth face today, and especially in my community where academics is highly valued. I live within 10 minutes of 2 major universities. They feel pressured, even not if it's spoken, to succeed in academics and to excel in all these things and get into the right school and make the family proud. And the pressure can become immense, because these kids, Not only are they in AP classes and whatever, but they're all supposed to be a star athlete and they're supposed to hold some kind of job and they're supposed to volunteer 20 hours a semester or something. I mean, it just adds on. And they get to the point where they just start thinking, I can't do it. And all these other people are doing it. I'm just never going to measure up. And that mindset opens the door to thoughts of suicide because they're afraid they're going to be shamed if they don't measure up or if they come out, if they're struggling with LGBTQ, all these things. And I realized several years ago, I think I was homesick and I was just trying to find something to watch. And I saw a movie on Netflix called Heart of Man under their Christian section. And warning, it's very mature topics. It is based on Christian values, but the topics are very, very mature. But I wanted to see what somebody had to say. And it was about all kinds of addictions. And one man in the movie who's being interviewed, and they said, "What turned you around?" And he said, "Well, I had a dream and I dreamt I was in prison for all these horrible things I have done," which they were prisonable offenses. But he was such a vile sinner. He was so vile, none of the other prisoners would sit near him. He was the worst of the worst. And I think we all have moments where we feel like somehow we're the worst of the worst. And then he noticed across the room the Savior enter in, and he just wanted to shrink. He was like, "He can't see me here. I'm terrible. I've hurt so many people with my addictions." He was trying to shrink away, and the Savior walked right to him and sat by him and took his hands and stared into his soul, didn't say a word, and he was just overcome with love. And he said, "I was in a place where I should have been shamed, ostracized, hated, and I was loved like I've never felt before." And then he realized that shame was a tool of the adversary to convince you not to get help. I'm bad. I'm not worth it. So that hit me so hard. When I feel like I have a truth, I exercise the theory. Like, what about in this scenario? Or what about in this scenario? Or what's happening right now in the news? What if we didn't shame the shooter? That's not relieving them of consequences. But what if we reached out to a kid who felt like they were less than something because they had same gender attraction, or they had some kind of addiction, or they were tricked into sending nude photos? What if they just knew that no matter what they did, they would be safe with their family or their parents? It wouldn't be shame. And so the more I tested out that theory, the more it ran out 100%. Nobody's story is finished, no matter what they've done. And if we could love others like that, we would give so much more grace and have so much more healing. So that's the problem of shame, young kids that don't have the experiences they need to deal with adult things that we shove in their face all the time. I'm certified to do some suicide prevention classes, and I did a training, and a woman in the comment time said, "We just need to teach these kids never to make a choice that could ruin their name forever. We just have to tell them that." And her heart, it was true because she was trying to avoid, like they were talking about a boy who had sent nude photos, and when the perpetrator was going to blackmail him, he killed himself because he just didn't see how anybody could love him that he did this big mistake. And so she's like, "Yeah, we just have to teach him not to make these big mistakes." And I said, "This is true. We should." And then when they do, because they're teenagers with a half-developed brain, they should have already learned that you are the safe person. It doesn't matter what they did, how heinous it was, or even innocent or a miscommunication, that they safely can come to you to navigate it, even with consequences. So that's the problem of shame, is we have not gotten over, I don't know, the image of sin, that we can't help somebody. I don't know.
A lot of what you're saying resonates with me because I did go to high school in Utah County. It was a long time ago, but that academic pressure and that, especially when you go to church on Sunday and they say, develop your talents. And then it somehow that turns into everybody feeling like they have to be the best at. They all have to be the gold medal. And if you're not, then you're just your value is diminished. In my high school, in fact, when it was being built at some time, it was being considered exclusively for students who are college bound. So if that doesn't tell you what kind of high value and priority education and academic advancement is, that should indicate to you. And yeah, like the cool kids in my school were the ones who had the most AP classes. And I learned I could only handle one a year. And I felt less than because I could only handle one AP class a year. And in that kind of reflection, as I've grown up and have gone through, my own mental health roller coaster, that that's kind of become one of my, I guess, mantras, my hallmarks, my touchstones, is that what you do or don't do doesn't add or diminish your value. I was ecstatic over Sister Runya's talk last conference.
Yes.
That illustration of no matter what you do or don't do, omission, commission, there's a long list. You are still a child of God. Your worth in God's eyes does not change. And with the perception of making mistakes, I think that's interesting that you brought that up because that's actually been on my mind. I've been pondering perfectionism versus being afraid to make a mistake and
Right.
how much I identified that in my own life, in my own history, and getting to the root of it. Why? Why am I afraid to make a misstep and appear like I don't have everything perfectly put together? Why am I afraid to just appear as a flawed human like we all are?
I think a lot of it is cultural and familial conditioning. Like I will have thought processes going through my head that say, now, if this falls in place and this falls in place, then I can do this. And I stop. I'm like, why do I have all these rules before I just do what I want to do? Because I don't want to upset the cart. And I'm doing it subconsciously. Well, I gotta stop that because I'm playing by these rules that in the spiritual realm doesn't make any sense. And I'm not talking about being offensive or mean. I'm just talking about proceeding.
That was one of the things that made me, I would say, fall in love with my husband because we met and here I am, a BYU student. He moves in from out of state. And when I realized how I performed academically didn't make a lick of difference on how he felt about me, I didn't realize how much that burden weighed me down until he lifted it.
Right.
Like, C's get degrees, I could have dropped out of college and he wouldn't have cared. You
Correct.
know? We
Correct.
would have found a way, we would have forged our own path, whereas to, some individuals, that probably would have been, like, the worst thing that could have happened.
Right. And you have to point out that you had a grandfather who taught at the University of Utah in optical physics and then went on to NASA to do missile guidance and infrared technologies. Another grandpa who taught at BYU, who taught anatomy and physiology, and his father was the president of Dixie College. So academics is huge in our family. But if you're like me, I feel like I missed some of those genius genes.
Yes, neither one of us are, renowned scientists if,
Right.
that wasn't evident
But we
at
also
this
have the
point.
artist side. So I think the creative part of us is
But yes.
what we inherited. But yeah, and it's not all bad. So I grew up in Missouri. Amy grew up in Utah because we're 10 years apart. And I have friends who, in the culture I lived in Missouri, it was a great honor to be engaged at high school graduation. That was your next step. College was not in there for a lot of these girls, but a lot of those girls are now divorced. And I was talking to my friend and said, well, I'm just trying to relate to you. Why was it high school marriage? And she goes, that's what it was. Nobody talked about college with me. I was good to get married. And she said, why didn't you? And I was like, well, because I was a little bit of a freak. Because it was always the dialogue in our home was college, which is great because I think 18 years old is kind of young to be committed. How old were you? 19 when you got
When I got
married?
married,
Yeah.
it was a month after I turned 20.
Okay, so but you had independence. You had left the nest. Yeah, that just kind of blew my mind that that was why these girls were doing it.
Before we hit record, you had mentioned an experience where you learned how your depression was actually a blessing in your life.
Right.
And I think that might be helpful for listeners who also struggle.
I was always an anxious child. I was number 3 and we were really close together, like 3 kids 2 years apart, not twins, just tender mercies. But I was always very anxious, and I'm also a serious observer, so I internalize things I see. Anyway, so I always was anxious, but going away to school was my first real mental health crisis, and it didn't make sense. It was my second year of college, and it got so bad, the anxiety got so bad, and when I get anxiety, it quickly morphs into anxiety and depression, and I didn't even know what these things were,
No
right?
one talked about it back then.
1989, 1990, it was really not. So it was really bad to the point where I withdrew in a semester. And now when I look back, I'm like, wow, I was just 3 weeks from finishing that semester. But at the time, I couldn't see how I could do it. And then on my mission was the next big, big problem where I just broke. And part of that was my mission. Nobody was getting their visas and everybody the plan changed every day. Like today, maybe we'll put you in the call center. And then the next day was like, maybe we'll send you all to Ogden for temporary mission calls. And it just changed every day. And we were in the MTC a couple of weeks longer than we should have been. And then I had a companion who said some very hurtful things that I felt betrayal because I thought we were there to love each other. And I'm sure that I owned some of that. I'm sure I had character flaws, but I didn't think we were hating each other. And so I cracked and had a serious major depression there. But it made my husband happy because he was waiting for me and I was eventually released. Anyway, during COVID, I had another depression. All the lockdowns, it was stressful for a lot of people. And there were a lot of things going on. Had a child getting married, had a child who, with his autism, I didn't know what he would become. And so I was just praying, pleading with the Father to lift this burden. I'm like, I've done this too many times. It hurts too much. I don't want it. Please bless me and take it away. And the Spirit said, this is your blessing. And my head was like, I was like, excuse me. No, this is not a blessing. But I know the Spirit doesn't lie. I put it to the test again. I said, okay, let's make this a blessing. I got some therapy, got a lot of therapy. I got angry. I had a lot of hard conversations that at the time in my childhood, I didn't know how to talk big subjects with older people. And it wasn't for vengeance or retribution, but it was to put it in a place instead of just letting it live up here. So, and it was a blessing. And now I look back and I'm like, I'm tough. I did some tough, hard stuff and I'm came through it and I'm better for it. I have more grace for people. I have more mercy for people. And I'm not afraid of these hard things that I guess at the time I thought were the end of the world. If you talked about these hard, intimate, really stressful situations. Because life is messy. You're going to have them, but I never felt like I had permission to experience them.
I think those paradoxical answers that we sometimes get are are definitely a step of the journey to realign our thoughts with something perceived as negative, detrimental, a roadblock, to really see how it is a stepping stone, it is a bridge. And I think that's half the battle that we face.
Right. One of the biggest things that changed my life as a parent, I was just parenting like was modeled to me, and what I saw the other parents doing was kind of micromanaging their children's education. Like they were always on the whatever app was that showed what assignments had been turned in. And they were always talking about, well, he didn't turn that in, and texting their kids and calling their kids and calling them out on it. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And I was going down that same road. And then a principal at my son's junior high challenged all the parents to read a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, Dweck. And I was up for the challenge, and you got a free book out of it. So I read it, and it was a complete 180 to how I was raised and expected to perform in school. And it showed me that real school, real life, real education is the experience, not saying the facts you learn don't matter, but it's the experience and it's the traits you glean from interacting with other humans and from overcoming something that's hard. So if my son, who was on the spectrum, would come home and be like, I didn't do well in class at all, I would say, tell me one thing that you learned. It doesn't even have to be about the subject. And he would say, well, I really liked the new poster my teacher put up. It really made the room bright. So we focused on that because that was a growing experience that he could find something positive in the classroom that he was struggling in. And so mindset is the kind of a growth thinking thing where your academics don't define you, but how you deal with failure and how you learn from failure and become more because of failure, which is much more healthy. And so I stopped the Skyward app. I stopped looking at their grades because I was telling them I didn't trust them to do schoolwork. And I started more of the you went to school and you tried something hard. That's great, and for all my kids. And school became a very positive, happy experience. And in college also, my son struggled his first year at college. He just wasn't ready for it. He didn't understand how college was different from high school. And he flunked out and he said, I'm just too dumb for school. I'm not a smart kid. And well, that's not true. School's just not set up for how you think. So we worked through that and did some other things. He did a two transformation, which took all the mental reserves he had. He came home and checked out for like a year, but he did it. And it was his choice. I never made him. It was his choice. He wanted to serve a mission. And then he went back and he did BYU pathways and he got A's in everything. And he was like, well, that wasn't too bad. I did okay. Maybe I'm not dumb. And I'm like, you're not dumb. And so he went back to school and now he is going a slower pace. He's 29, but now he's taking Japanese. He's in the game design animation program at UVU, and he's been to Japan twice. Now, from the kid I knew at 18 to the kid I know at 29, he's different, so different. He's a state clerk. So all the stuff that's in there that needs to be in there for him to develop finally started fitting in. But it was because we made it acceptable to do it a different way, a different path.
Something that I also recognize in myself, and as you just shared in his story, time. We put these time restrictions on ourselves. Like when I was in high school, for some reason, I had this imaginary deadline that I'd given myself that if I hadn't, mastered X, Y, and Z by the time I graduated high school, well, then the rest of my life was already off course. I don't know where that came from. And the element of time, like for your son, okay, so going to college right out of high school wasn't right for him. And that's fine. I have a niece here in Idaho who's had certain health issues. She should have, air quotes, graduated in 24, and she's still finishing up her high school credits. And that's just the pace she needs to go at. Or my own daughter, Marin, we discussed her in an earlier episode with her mental health issues with cyclothymia and going to an alternative school to get herself to a place where she could finish at the local high school. To a lot of people, that would be shameful. You had to divert on a different course, or you had to divert on a different timeline. Why on earth is that shameful? What is wrong with that? I mean, a time and season for everything. You don't want to have failure to launch where you never get there,
Right.
but it doesn't have to look like everybody's path.
Right. And it really shouldn't. And that's where mercy falls into place. where we can stop being so rigid in whatever, I don't know if it's our culture or if it's family or if it's religion or a mix of all that, but we tend to bring shame to those who don't fit in. But if we just had mercy and said, "Hey, we all qualify for some level of grace because we're God's children." So that's not just God's job, that's our job.
Do you remember when you took me to Marie Callender's for pie when I didn't get into the elementary ed program?
No, but it sounds like something I would
Oh
do.
my goodness. Well, mom was a teacher. I'll be a teacher. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew
Right.
up. In fact, I don't know what I want to
Me
be when
too,
I grow
yeah.
up. Like it should be what do I want to do? Anyway, that's another tangent.
Right.
So, I didn't get into my degree. You took me out to pie and it was delicious. That's where I learned I really love chocolate pie. And some people thought I should reapply. And I was just, for me, in, my 19 years of wisdom, I just said, no, I'm not going to waste time reapplying. I wanted to, again, this timeline, I wanted to graduate in my 4 years. And so I just switched everything to a program of study that everything transferred over and I wasn't going to lose my
Right.
time or, credits. And that ended up being, it's called Home and Family Life, but essentially it was a home ec degree. But talking about things that seem detrimental on the outset, but are a blessing on the other side, is because of that, I took different parenting classes, child development classes, child psychology classes. I can honestly say there's not been a day in my life that I have not used something in my degree.
Right.
And what a blessing, because my children aren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I can see in some ways, as in when compared to their peers, how the extra knowledge and education I had in raising children has played to
Right.
certain advantages.
And a lot of that is not in our society anymore. It's not valued anymore. I had so many majors. It was so funny. I started off being a teaching major. I did take some kind of child development or family class, a family science class. And the professor I had, his name was Alvin Price, and he had actually been mom and dad's bishop and helped them adopt our brother John.
This is a new story for me.
Yes, when they told my parents, they told my mom she was barren, she was not having children. So they started adopting John, and before the adoption was complete, my mom was expecting my older sister Rosemary, and she just thought it was the miracle of miracle. And then I came 11 months later and she goes, "Okay, I think I believe in family planning now," because she just wore a house dress and changed diapers, cloth diapers, all day long. So anyway, I took his class because mom would always tell me what a dear man Alvin Price was. And if you ever get his class at BYU, you won't regret it. And I love that class. He had done missions to orphans in Romania, and it kind of scarred him because he just saw terrible things. But he was still a fantastic teacher, a professor. And one of the things in class he said was they were talking to like the four types of parenting style.
Hmm.
And he said, "Now, how many of you think that the parenting style where you make your kids go to church and you make your kids do their homework and you make your kids and you make your kids is the right way to go?" And I was like, "Well, that's what I was raised with. I think that's good, because I was a teenager and stupid." Then he goes, "Well, you're wrong." And I was like, "How can that be wrong?" And this is when I first started testing these theories. He said, "If you look at Adam and Eve, they were not forced ever in the choices that they were given. So if you think it's done by force, you need to start reevaluating how parenting really works." And I was doing this. He's so out of it. What is he talking about? But then I started testing the theory, and the answer always came up, "That's true. That is true." So I try to raise my kids with as much reasonable agency and respecting their choices all through their lives. And they got to the point where they would say, "I don't want to go to church today." Well, I'm lucky that I live in Utah and the church is a 2-minute walk away. So I would just say, I understand. I sometimes don't want to go to church either. I just tell you to go to church because the prophet told me to tell you to go to church, and the prophet tells me to tell you to go to church because God tells him to tell me to tell you to go to church. But that's between you and him, and you can just go say a prayer, tell him you're not going to go to church, and fine. And I would leave. They always came.
That is golden.
They always came. I hope it wasn't too heavy on the guilt, but I said it's your choice and you're accountable. And I respect that. So, and a lot of the hard things like what if I get a tattoo, mom? Well, I think it's a bad idea, but you're an adult and you have money. And I respect that you'll think really long and hard about this choice before you do it. So far, no tattoos. That giving them an ability to make good and bad choices in a safe place, I think has really helped my kids stay in the gospel. I mean, I knock on wood, but so far they're all very dedicated to their testimonies, which isn't common these days.
Well, and as grateful we are for that, even if they chose to not, the fact that they feel empowered enough to make the choice and to still nurture a relationship with their parents, even though it's not the choice the parents would have had them choose.
They still feel safe in the family that they can make this big choice and still feel safe and respected and hopefully return that respect. Like, I don't
Yes.
believe as you believe, but you don't believe as I believe, but we're still because we're family. The belief is not more important than the relationship.
How does all of this, the suicide prevention, the mental health, the parenting, how does this tie into our covenants and our covenant joy, would you say?
When I think about covenant joy, it's a very circular thing. It's not from point A to point B. It's this experience, this sphere, our world, and it's messy and it's unpredictable and it's painful, but it's like we've got this extra bubble wrap around us, right? It's all going to be okay. Give it space, give it time. His work isn't finished. If you see a kid doing something that you're like, oh, you can't do, don't worry about that. Don't worry about the path they're on. Worry about connection and love. And God has a way to make the story come together. And to me, that brings me, I guess, covenant peace, but also covenant joy. Like the man who dreamt that he was in prison and he was untouchable because he was so vile. We are all that man. We have all sinned against God. Every single one of us. Just because some of our sins are more noticeable than others. We are all needing that grace. And so the covenant joy is that it's okay. We aren't going to measure up. And that's part of the plan. It's okay because we're learning pain. Pain is one of the best teaching tools he has. And a lot of people have problems with that. They're like, well, if he was a good God, he wouldn't inflict pain on us. But he hasn't inflicted anything that he didn't inflict on his own son, which he didn't inflict the pain, but he opened the door for the agency for his son to choose to experience that pain. So that's the joy. If you can put your mind around this messy experience and give people mercy and have mercy and realize from birth to death is not what we have to experience. Time doesn't matter to him. We have to change our thinking to this experience globe or ball or mess or whatever you want to call hair wad, I don't know. But it's an experience, not a destination. So that's where I feel about covenant joy and the joy. I also think of it as a car. You're going on a trip, you're driving somewhere, and on your road trip, a big storm happens. And so everybody's turning on their high beams to see. But your car has the newfangled high beams, like higher beams, because those beams are covenant beams. You get to see more and understand more about the storm and what you're going through because you can see clearer because you have that covenant connection. So I don't know if that's a good analogy, but
I think that's an impactful analogy. Talk about light so often.
right.
and how important that is to understanding our divine natures and
Right.
the grandness of Heavenly Father's plan that we can only catch little glimpses of. As you were talking about your point A to point B, I was thinking about, well, everything that happened before point A and everything that's going to happen after point B. And I thought of President Nelson's Think Celestial. If you're looking at all of it, like how time doesn't really matter to Heavenly Father, and how through grace, the atonement, and just his goodness, everything is made right. And he can even take things that go wrong and make them things that help us, that benefit us. It's the beauty for ashes. He can turn
Right.
the awful into something beautiful.
Right.
And I also thought of President Nelson's, we can have joy despite our circumstances because it's about our focus.
Right. Right. And the focus outside of yourself is much more rewarding than if you get stuck in here. And I want to say that mental health and mental wellness, some people are stuck in there for a lifetime, and it's really brain illness. If you struggle with mental health and it's a constant struggle, you need to know that it's more than your cuckoo or whatever. It's a physical thing, and there are things that you can do medically, medicinally, therapeutically, and with your own mindset to work with that. And God knows, and He has grace, a lot of grace for people who struggle with mental health. It still has some stigma. It's getting better. But if you are in crisis, there's the National Suicide Helpline, Lifeline. It's a text or call 988. A lot of people are afraid to do that, but it is anonymous. The first thing they do is kind of a mental triage to make sure you're not in danger right then and there. When you call 988, it goes to your local area. You're not going to talk to somebody in New York City. You're going to talk to somebody in Idaho. It gets fed to people near you who know a little bit more about your culture. Give yourself grace for mental illness. Try to find humor in it. Sometimes that's fun. But I just want people to know that the people who make you feel safe, those are people who follow Christ.
Thank you for joining me today on New and Everlasting. I'm so grateful to Cathy for her honesty, her faith, and her willingness to share such tender experiences. Her reminder that our worth isn't defined by shame, grades, or mistakes, but by the grace of Jesus Christ is one I hope we all carry forward. Don't forget, the Divine Worth Summit is coming soon, and I'd love for you to be part of it. It's a beautiful chance to deepen your own sense of divine identity and connect with women seeking covenant joy together. Check the show notes for your invitation. If this episode touched you, please subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a review. Every share helps spread the message of covenant joy to more hearts. Until next time, remember, you are loved, you are known, and your worth is eternal.
God is good
All the time.
all the time.
God is good.